Hello, I'm HarvestBuildDestroy, and in this video I want to talk about how economic upgrades work in Age of Empires 2. Although there's a lot of information online for players looking to get better at the game, it seems to me that most of it is geared toward what to do, without much emphasis on why. That's what I'd like to talk about here. There are a lot of economic upgrades in Age of Empires 2, and they're fairly complicated, even on the surface. But they're probably even more complicated than you think, if you look at them in the context of the game as a whole. In this video, I'd like to show you how to think about economic upgrades, even if you already know when to get them. Let's start with the first wood gathering upgrade, Double Bit Axe. Basically everyone knows that this is one of, if not the most important upgrade in the game. If you're planning on staying in the feudal age, you basically research it right away. And if you're fast castling, it's priority number 1 after you click up. And it should be. It's really cost effective. It costs 100 food and 50 wood, and makes your lumberjacks chop wood 20% faster. One way to think of this is if you have 10 lumberjacks, it's sort of like getting 2 extra lumberjacks. In fact, it's even better, because if you actually had 2 more lumberjacks, your villagers would bump into each other a little bit more on their way back to the lumber camp, reducing the rate of wood collection per villager ever so slightly. But if we zoom out and look at the context of an entire game of Age of Empires 2, it's even better than that. We all know how important it is to have as close to 0 TC idle time as possible in the early game, but why exactly is that? Well, think of it this way. Up until the Castle Age, you can't build a second town center. If you and your opponent are both maintaining constant villager production, and you lose a villager in an early skirmish, that's a 1 villager deficit that you can't get back until you have more town centers than your opponent. Prior to the Castle Age, economic upgrades are the only other way to increase your economic output, at least on land maps. I think it's important to consider how interrelated food and wood are in Age of Empires 2. If you think about it another way, Double Bit Axe is kind of a food upgrade too. For example, if you have 12 lumberjacks, you could have one of them build a farm as the upgrade completes, and your wood gather rate would still be higher than it was before you researched the upgrade. To put it another way, after you research Double Bit Axe, it requires fewer lumberjacks to sustain the same number of farms. Similarly, Horse Collar is also technically a wood upgrade rather than a food upgrade, but it affects your food income in the long run. When researched, your farms contain more food, which means that there's a longer period of time before each farm needs to be replanted. This means that your farmers can continue to gather additional food for a longer period of time before you have to spend more wood again to rebuild the farm. Over time, this is a huge quantity of wood in your pocket. It also does technically increase your food income ever so slightly in and of itself as well, because your farmers don't have to rebuild the farms as often, which is time spent not farming. I'll note here that Horse Collar is not necessarily as time sensitive as Double Bit Axe. The moment Double Bit Axe finishes, your economic output increases almost as if you'd received a few extra villagers, but Horse Collar doesn't actually do anything for you until you plant a new farm, and it's at least possible that there could be an entire minute at this stage of the game where none of your farms require replanting. Basically, you get Double Bit Axe and Horse Collar as soon as possible, in that order, unless you're fast castling, in which case they're your next priorities after clicking up. You probably already knew that, but, maybe now you understand why a little more. So what about wheelbarrow and gold mining? Wheelbarrow is a bit more complicated, and will also require us to zoom out and look at the game as a whole. As Spirit of the Law points out in his video on when to get wheelbarrow, it actually isn't more cost-effective than constant villager production until you have around 46 villagers, and yet more often than not, you'll see top-level players researching it when they have 30 villagers or less. The reason, ultimately, is that your food income in the feudal age is generally more important than your overall income. Villagers don't gather food from farms very quickly, and you need an established wood economy to build them. Remember that Age of Empires is largely about having more stuff than your opponent. After all, you're building an empire. And having more stuff basically means having more villagers, because villagers let you gather the stuff that lets you make more stuff. As big of a fan of Spirit of the Law's channel as I am, his numbers don't quite tell the whole story in this case. Your gold economy is only important insofar as you can support your unit composition and/or gather the measly 200 gold required to click up to castle. At least on land maps, there's generally no realistic in-game scenario where you would want to have more than 7 gold miners in the feudal age, which, if you were unaware, is how many you need to sustain constant archer production from 2 archery ranges. Therefore, a realistic 46 villager feudal economy would consist of at least 39 villagers gathering food and wood. The exact ratio would depend on your unit composition, but let's say you have somewhere between 16 and 19 farms. That's a lot more farms than you can fit around your town center and mill without double layering them. Remember that each farm will net you less food when they're double layered, especially when you don't have wheelbarrow. Your villagers, who move more slowly without wheelbarrow, have to walk an extra 3 tiles every time they gather 10, rather than 13, food. Not only that, you need extra lumberjacks to support these farms, and you need to spend food to get these lumberjacks, which aren't doing anything other than giving you the necessary wood to support these extra farms. According to Zero Empires, you need an extra villager on wood for every 3 farms or so, just to continue to support them. I think it's hard to put an exact number on when it's best to get wheelbarrow, but I would say it's around the time you have to start double layering farms. There's another subtle point here that I think is worth mentioning. No matter what you're doing in the Feudal Age, your ultimate goal is always to get to the Castle Age, since it's nearly impossible to flat out kill your opponent before you have siege weapons. This is why I said before that your food economy is more important than your overall economy in the Feudal Age, because it's the resource that limits your ability to advance to the Castle Age, since it's the hardest resource to gather a lot of, and you only need 200 gold to click up. For this reason, you could say that one of your goals in the Feudal Age is to develop a surplus of food, because it's ultimately the resource that limits your ability to advance to the Castle Age, and you need to continually spend food to keep making villagers. Regarding wheelbarrow, if I crunch the numbers using the values found in Spirit of the Law's video on sustaining unit production in the Feudal Age, you need 6.09 farmers to sustain villager production without wheelbarrow, and only 5.48 with wheelbarrow. In case you were wondering, that number goes down to 5.02 with handcart. The point is, your surplus of food, which is the limiting factor for how quickly you can click up, increases when wheelbarrow is researched. This is basically why it never makes sense to research gold mining in the Feudal Age. It costs 100 food and 75 wood, and makes your gold miners mine 15% faster. Like I mentioned, you'd realistically never really want to have more than 7 gold miners in the Feudal Age on a land map, so researching this upgrade is at best like getting 1 free villager, and given its cost, the extra time you'll have to spend gathering more food before you click up isn't worth it. If you watch the top players play, you probably notice that they research gold mining while they're advancing to the Castle Age. This is around the earliest point in the game where it will do anything for you. Remember that you need 7 gold miners to sustain constant knight production from 1 stable, and only 6 after the upgrade. Similarly, you can support constant archer production from 3 archery ranges with 9 gold miners with the upgrade. Upon hitting the Castle Age, and consequently being able to build additional town centers and research bowsaw and horse collar, this becomes a lot more significant, as it allows you to dedicate a larger percentage of your total villagers to food and wood, the backbone of your economy. By the time you reach the Castle Age, your tech tree options become a lot more open, and it becomes a lot harder to say for sure when it's best to get each subsequent economic upgrade. There are just so many different things you can do in Age of Empires 2, and they'll each have their own set of requirements. The number of villagers required to sustain unit production will change every time you research an economic upgrade, and then all of that goes out the window when you research conscription in the Imperial Age. The only hard fast rule that I can think of is that bowsaw is generally your first priority in the Castle Age, aside from power spike upgrades like crossbow, bodkin arrow, or war galley. Heavy plow is a high priority too, and you definitely want it before you start booming from 2 or 3 town centers, which requires a pretty large number of farmers. I would, however, tend to argue that crop rotation is a higher priority than 2-man saw in the Imperial Age, because the more food your farms contain, the less often you have to replant them, and the time spent doing this can really add up in the Imperial Age when you have 50 or more farms. Besides, 2-man saw only increases your wood collection rate by 10% anyway. Alright, that's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider rating, commenting, and subscribing. It really helps. See you soon.